One thing that we want to, as John mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that happens is this OpenVNMRJ, which is a software component of all your systems, continues to evolve. It's not just about maintaining status quo. We have to continue to evolve. Your hardware potentially has a lot more life than you would have money to turn it around. So unless we keep the software in a cutting edge or latest, you will not be exploit the strength of your hardware. So that's our mission, really, to make sure that you are able to do the latest developments, publications, techniques, tools that come out, that you will be able to do it in a much more easier, continuous way. That's our mission. So, so obviously, this is our all thought process right now. Obviously, we cannot do this without your support, right? I mean, it's almost but impossible. So one thing that Dan and I have been talking about for a while is to come up with some idea as to how you can support us in terms of some sponsorship, some kind of an annual subscription, if you may. So as this is completely open to suggestions, discussions. This is just a version number 0, if you may, of our idea. What we can do, because it's the kind of developments that are coming out in literature, coming out in our thought processes, having this combined, if I may announce this, combined 60 years of experience with variant system. I have only 1 year, and he has a 59. So he's the Batman, I'm the Robin. And so how we can exploit this? Yeah, we need to exploit this somehow, right? So one way of thinking is some kind of a sponsorship. The community sponsor us, and we can continue to do this. Obviously, we won't be able to do that without some critical mass, meaning that unless we have a minimum number of sponsors, it will be very difficult. And not that we are going to give up, but it will be a lot more difficult. So some of the benefits that we could think about would be, you will get some turnkey solutions. You get to drive the our future developments as a sponsor, meaning you can set the goals for this partnership, and also because any sponsor would be someone who is privileged sponsor, so you get to play with these new tools exclusively than an open source before we put it in the open source. Those are the kind of ideas we are thinking about. One of the things that I brought in was last time at Smash, I gave a talk on Craft 2D. There was a lot of interest in that. So I mean, that's not part of, that was development after Agilent. We can include that and more. I'm not asking you to do anything at this time. Go for it. Go for the next one. The interesting thing is, as we were talking about, Dan and I were talking about brainstorming what we can do, there was this thread. Don't bother to read this whole thing. It's actually, the thread is long thread on N15 2D NMR. What's the best N15 2D NMR? But recently, I was making statements to the effect, yes, we can do these things. We are all available, willing to do this. But we lost the safety net, and I was complaining, if you may. Then Bill Reynolds came back and then he said, yes, you have a good point. I'm just going to read that box area, which sort of hit me, and then I sent that to Dan and said, this is exactly what we were talking about. He said, in view of the advantages to the large user pool of having true living VNMRJ, it might justify having an annual fee for access to updated programs sufficient to cover the cost. So that was, he had no idea that we were thinking in those lines, so that I thought that was a pretty good third party, if you may, a suggestion of the same thing. So if you go to the next slide, obviously this is not this is not a marketing or a sales pitch. We are not asking you to do anything without putting too much burden on anyone. How can this make this happen? So really, we are soliciting your opinion and concurrence on the support. Think about it. We can talk over the day in there. And should we even, the last question was, should we even bother with thinking these lines to the larger Ivan community? Right now it's a small founding community. There's an Ivan community, put it in website and see if we can get such sponsorship. Again, the idea is to see right now what kind of a feedback we get. We are doing more or less like a market research, if you may. Think about, we are doing a market research. Is this viable for the two of us to spend our time on this or not? So with that, I just wanted to let you go with some thoughts on this and then give us feedback. That's pretty much it. Yep.
There are a few things that are not on the GitHub site just because they're so big. So the manuals are like 300 megabytes, so I didn't put those on because GitHub only gives you a certain amount of space. So you would be missing manuals, you'd be missing NMR pipe, but you can get that from Frank's site because that's like 300 megabytes also. And I don't actually have the source code for that anyway. FidLibs, Bayesian, actually I'm working with Larry Brathorst, so we'll eventually get Bayesian into it. FidLibs, basically data sets, huge. And so, but everything else will be there.
So basically, if you're going to do it, you should load VJ 4.2 first.
And then if you need manuals, then you have to, yeah. So one of the things that Krish and I might do is sort of collect all those things that aren't in the OVJ directly just because they're so big and put them somewhere where people can get at them without having to put in 4.2.
Right now you can build NMR pipe. There's a website, Frank still continues the website, and there's a script available to build it the way it will work within VNMRJ. Yeah, you can build it. I have a script and we can build that. Same thing about Bayesian. You can go to Washington University website, download. Obviously, you can't make changes. You download the binary. But it is a website freely available in the Washington University website. But after you download, you need to know which files I need to pull out of this and all that. And so there is a procedure available too. But these are all your steps that you have to do if you don't have the VNMRJ 4.2 pre-installed on your system before you put OpenVJ. So
one of the things that John, again, is very good to you guys, is he's actually going to make a new Kickstart that should be coming out soon that will have VJ 4.2 pre-installed. So in the Kickstart process, it'll ask you a couple questions. Do you want the Chinese language? Do you want the Japanese language? And then it'll just install everything, and then you can install OpenVJ on top of that, and it would have all the manuals and everything.
What I was going to say is a lot of us already pay an annual maintenance fee for some kind of NMR software. We pay our annual Mestranova license upkeep. I'm sure that the ACD people have some similar schemes. So, we're in it for several $1,000s a year, and what that gives us is tech support, and a certain number of new releases that are going to come out every year. So, I think there's an established model for that. I would say in terms of what you're talking about, if it could include, some sort of offer of tech support so that if I fill out my annual purchase request and submit it, I have to say, well, what am I buying? That something that sounds reasonably tangible like that, a personal answer to a question about what's happening.
One thing that we did, Dan and I did talk about is having sponsors. I don't want to deviate too much from this being a community project, but at the same time, the sponsors we can provide maybe a preferential, or when we try to solve a problem or technical support, your priority gets multiplied as a sponsor versus somebody who submits directly through non-sponsor submitting to OpenVNMRJ. Those are the kind of things that we are thinking of, but your point is very well taken. It is certainly something that we are evolving our ideas, and before we put any definition of what you get in this support mechanism, I am really thinking more, is it even viable from our perspective? Let's just face it, if it's, let's say 10 people just say, okay, I will do it for 10 of those, right? And if we commit to that 10, then that's a huge resource that we are committing just for 10 sponsors, right? So we need to think about what is the minimum viability from the two of us to put all our effort into this, because this can shift our responsibility from doing the other things that brings bread to the table. We can essentially shift our responsibilities to continuing a community project like this. But there is a minimum. There's a minimum viability that I just don't know yet what that is. But we certainly need a minimum critical minimum, if you may. Yeah. And we are still thinking. We will put together some kind of if this group thinks that it's an idea, fine tune it. Like you have given this feedback. If you give further feedback, we will all put it together. Perhaps an open letter in Ivan website. And perhaps through other sources, we can put an open letter asking, is this something that, instead of asking for, are you willing to sponsor? If we go through this, how many of you will be willing to sponsor? That will tell us an idea as to, do we meet the critical mass? If we do, then we can say, okay, let's just go for this. So it's sort of there's both altruistic reasons here as well as a business reason, obviously. We are trying to make survive. At the same time, we are also, there is a passion to keep this VNMR alive, and not just alive from the point of that it can do what it can do, rather it can do what current technology can do. It can do something that others cannot do, if you may. Yeah. We want to make it into unparalleled. I mean, I know I am a big fan of craft and things like that, and there are things that we can do with craft that no one else can do. It can become truly unparalleled. I'm just taking craft as an example. Certain things that Dan has ideas on. We can do things that is available to this community on a longer term. And so, what are the ideas we have? We have a few lists, and that's where we are asking you to trust our background and past experience.
So do you have any plan or prospect to do some bug fix of the console code? So we are actually facing a lot of issues, probably that's supposed to be related to the console code. And Agilent actually noticed, and they promised to fix that issues as one of the conditions we purchased the console, but they left and went out for the business, and that issue actually stays. Of course, I think that the console code is still proprietary, and you can't do anything now, but how about in future?
In the future. So what I did take the console code and put it on the OpenVJ site. I had to, per Agilent instructions, remove a couple core pieces so that it can't be compiled, but you can look at it. Can we turn the thing off? No. I'm being recorded, so I don't want to say anything I shouldn't. There is a chance in the future that we can. There's a potential. Now, I know about your particular problem, and I believe we tried to solve that before, not very successfully when we were still Agilent, and so you have a particularly difficult problem. We can at least investigate alternatives, perhaps, yes. But currently, we can't recompile Agilent console code.
I'd say that's something we should be thinking about.
We could certainly approach Agilent and do it officially, and see if they'll let us do it.
I mean, are there, and you don't have to say anything now, but in general for the community, are there other console issues that this rhetorical question, that might go on that same list with the one that we know about?
Well, I certainly know about one for Mercury's, that people complain about the auto lock on Mercury's, that it's been painful at best. That's a little harder to compile because you actually need a Sun Microsystem system to compile those, which I think Christine still has one, but other than that, most people don't have Sun Microsystems. So possibly there could be, yes.
Mike Strain and I have put OpenVNMRJ, actually it's on one of our systems, but it is actually a very transparent process. And so once it's a good idea to get, well, you have to have VNMRJ 4.2 on there and you should upgrade to the 110 patch. Then I haven't used the switch VJ, but it's basically a matter of pressing the button to install it. And at this point, your console is no different than it was before. So if you have users that you're worried about that something might happen, basically nothing will happen, at least. I hope that will be the case. Also the other thing, I don't think it was exactly mentioned, you talked about CentOS. Certainly, OpenVNMRJ loads transparently onto Red Hat 6.3, which is on most of our computers, and we of course don't want to change that. Actually, a question to Dan. There was the other official 5.3?
5.3 what?
Red Hat 5.3? Yeah, there are people still running 5.3.
It requires 6.
It requires 6.
Unless you compile it yourself. If you get the released one, that requires Red Hat 6, CentOS 6. But if you compile it yourself, then you can compile it on whatever you want.
I've got it to work with the autocompiler, and just about every time it's
Right. Right, yeah. But, I mean, the issue is when you compile it on 6, it usually doesn't go back. It's not compatible backwards, but it's usually compatible forward. So if you compile it on a 5 system, it'll actually run on a 6. But if you compile it on a 6 system, which these are, it won't run on a 5. So, but you can compile it yourself. Yes? Questions?
This is sort of a stream of consciousness question, going back to your kind of to your sponsorship idea as well. What sort of adoption rate have you gotten so far for OpenVNMRJ? And then a subset of that is, what is the adoption rate of 4.2? That seems like more likely the audience that would be receptive of sponsorship because they want to run the latest, compared to what John said, 5,000 variant systems out there. What's the percentage that want to run the latest and keep it at running the latest?
I'm seeing some strange people walking past our door. But anyway, I don't have a good number. What I looked at once was how many people have gone to the patch for the 110 patch and downloaded it, and there's about 500. So about 500 people have gotten that patch, suggesting they're up to 4.2. I know there are still people who are doing conversions, and anytime someone sends a question to spin sites that says, oh, I'm running 3.2 or I'm running 2, I said, it really would be good if you went to 4.2 because it's very difficult to support those older systems. A lot of bugs have been fixed in that 18 months that I was on the lights out team. I think I made 6 patches. I spent all my day doing one of 2 things, either fixing bugs or doing the OpenVJ, getting rid of copyrights. So by counting how many people downloaded the 110, like I say, 500, I'm not sure if we have a way to figure out how many people have gotten OVJ. I know there have been a few, but Tim, that's more Tim Burrows keeps track of that stuff, and he's unfortunately not here, but I don't know the answer to that.
Because it seems like a chicken and egg question. Which do you do first? If you put a lot of effort into it, are you going to get the results? Versus if you don't put any effort to it, will the
I understand right now. It's very similar to 4.2. So I mean, it's based on 4.2 with a 110 patch. So there's not a huge benefit currently. I mean, like I said, there are a few bugs fixed, and there's this applications thing. But until some people, it's exactly your chicken and egg, until some people start to use it, we won't get new applications for it. And so that's why, I think it would be a good idea if people did, but I don't know the number.
An example would be one item that Dan put out was non-uniform sampling in Mercury system, right? That's obviously is if you want to do an NUS on a Mercury system, encourage you to go to an OpenVJ with the NUS, which I don't know whether it's not in there.
Yeah, but
So as we go down the path, things like that, 3D gradient shimming on Mercury, is that one? Another bit. So these kind of pieces that are, it will never make it to 4.2. That's shut down. In other words, it will not move forward. Whereas OVJ is open, and if as people find it that it gives them tools that they have no access to through 4.2, the hope is that people will start to move with OVJ 1, 2, 3, whatever version you can think of, and then that is where the future, my guess at this time is. And if we come up with a new tool that is needed, I'm trying to think of some tools that you can think about. Some of the new latest things that are coming up in pure shift areas, fast non-uniform sampling based reaction monitoring areas. That's by that group in Poland. These are recent techniques that are coming out, and if as a OVJ support group, if we can evolve those and make it available to you, here is an option, a tool that perhaps, if not academic, perhaps even in academics, industries might want to follow a reaction much faster rate, at a rate of your incrementation rate. You can follow the reactions with that kind of a tool. So if we commit to building those things in systems in a way that it will expand OpenVNMRJ, my prediction maybe is that people will shift eventually from 4.2. 4.2 may simply become like 3.2 when 4.2 became so. And we can march forward, and obviously we will not be able to put that in 4.2, whatever we develop. And these are the new ideas that are coming out in literature. And here is an opportunity for, from a technical point of view, this non-uniform sample-based reaction monitoring at a much faster rate. Technically, I see no reason why we can't do it. I see no reason why our hardware system cannot do it. It's just software. And if we can make that happen, here are those kind of tools. I'm just giving this as an example. So I'm looking at it in a long term. There are things that we can put in that will trigger or encourage people to go to OpenVNMRJ as their primary source of software to control their spectrometer, rather than 4.2. Right now, yes, 4.2, 110 patch is no different than OpenVJ. But this is where we are starting. Or we meaning the Ivan group is starting. And we are starting from OpenVJ and encourage you to go into OpenVJ and start using OpenVJ. Perhaps we can build that on a longer scale, and perhaps your system will do recent technologies. Your hardware, you have hardware that is capable of doing a lot of things that perhaps will get published 2 years from now. But without the software support, you have to build it yourself. And I think that's where the idea of this OpenVJ is just phenomenal. Idea of, this group, WASIG group, having this, I congratulate them. This is fantastic. There's so much rich information, rich history in there, rich content in there, and there is no point in not exploiting it as we move forward. That's my argument for people should move to OpenVJ. Even if it is equal to 4.2 with 110, then what's stopping you from going to OpenVJ? That will be my question, rather than what is asking, why should you go to OpenVJ?
Just on that subject, from my perspective, after leaving Agilent and taking a job in a real facility, to me, software upgrades were a really scary thing because you guys did them all. and they still are to a certain extent, because they're the don't fix it unless it's broke. And certainly, it seems to me that that's one area where tech support is needed, either through Ivan for free, like the recipe for upgrading your system, or through some kind of group like yours that will take responsibility. And so that's just a comment I'd want to make. It would seem to me that, for example, older Annovas would have Dells on them, and you might want to upgrade those to HPs, put 6.3 on them, put 4.2, and then open the NMRJ. But it brings up an older Annova into, the modern world. And so I think that that's a role for tech support.
Yeah. I mean, one of the arguments that I used to have when I was at Lilly was, the rotation period of a hardware versus a software is software should rotate much, much faster than hardware. Hardware need to. And many of these hardwares in the recent developments, I'm going back to Unity Pluses as well. They can do a lot of things that futuristic at that time. Many George is sitting here. Many of the BioPack stuff were done on Unity Plus. And that was very futuristic hardware. But without keeping the software up to date, you are handicapping the strength of the hardware. And that's where I want to, these guys who put it all together into OpenVJ should be applauded. They just did a phenomenal job of getting that out.
I think we're done. We're done? Oh, George.
George?
Yes, George. You mentioned bio in these part.
I know. I shouldn't have said anything about bio in that.
Don't worry, it's not about BioPack. I'm sure a number of people here would be curious about the future of SpinSight, because that's, again, the spirit of user support. So maybe you guys can give us an enlightenment there.
What I can tell you is that back in June of last year, Agilent made an official proclamation that they would support SpinSight for 2 more years. That 2 years will be ending next June. I have written Josh Karutz, who was the prime mover of SpinSights, was hired by Agilent, and he moved into the mass spec group there, and was going to do something similar to SpinSights for the mass spec group. That was his intention, and then he was going to slip the NMR piece into that mass spec piece so that we could continue to support the NMR piece under the umbrella of the mass spec SpinSights version. I believe Josh has been WFM'd. And so I wrote a little note to Dan Steele, who is the head of the tech support group at Agilent, and asked them, what are the plans for SpinSights? I asked, what I said was, is all hope lost or something like that? And he wrote back, says, well, hope has been lost for a long time already, but they're planning to hire a replacement for Josh, and he was hoping this replacement would support SpinSights, but your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. Officially, till next June, unless they can hire someone who slips it in under the nose of the Agilent executives.
I mean, as an Ivan community, I don't see why not this user community takes over the contents of SpinSight and start to manage an equivalent, not necessarily SpinSite itself, Ivan site, something like that. Yeah, as a fundamental principle, I don't see that as a bottleneck, except that it requires work to be done. But there's a significant amount of content in SpinSite. If Agilent is not interested in SpinSite, they want to shut it down. The content they may probably just give it out, and we can potentially even this user group, this group, can drive that and make it into a community forum that is maintained somewhere. And my hope is that openvnmrj.com will use something like SpinSite.
It's good. It's not clear that we know how to do that. I mean, Agilent's pins, actually, it costs them like $80,000 a year to support SpinSites. And my guess is they will not spend that money just for NMR. If we can get it into the mass spec things, then they'll be okay with it. But
Just a small thing. We've mentioned in various cases here a Ivan website. It's not set up yet, but we do have a domain name that's appropriate, Ivan MR, that we hope that we'll be putting the contents of this meeting on, and which will be a start towards an information source for Ivan. So hopefully that will get started over the next few months.